Hey guys, Savage Joy here with Real Progressives. Tonight I am joined by Andrew Morris. He is running in Texas HD64, which means house. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Andrew.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So I noticed that you actually have an accent when I just talked to you now. I actually didn't find that out when I was researching you. So do you just want to give a little background of where you're from and how long you've been in Texas?
Yeah, so I was born and raised in the UK and lived there for my first 17 years, moved around the UK from Yorkshire to Cheshire, which is the Manchester, Liverpool area, and then went down to south of London for a few years. Dad decided to get a job out in Australia when I was 17, so he moved the whole family out there. I wasn't quite prepared to strike it out on my own yet at 17. And then while in Australia, I was there for 4.5 years, and while I was there, I struck up a pen pal friendship with my wife, and something just clicked between us. We weren't anticipating it. We actually gave each other relationship advice when we were first talking. And then 10 years ago, I moved to be with her. So I've been in Denton, Texas ever since.
You know, something that I noticed looking through your photos and I have never seen someone so madly in love with someone as you are with your wife. It's so beautiful and it's just adorable the way you talk about her and the way you light up. And I'm like, man, teach my husband something because he does not look like that when we're together.
My mom asked the same thing because she's like, you didn't get that romantic streak out of Dad. I can tell you that
much. That's awesome. She's very fortunate. But I digress. I invited Matt Farmer here. I'm not sure if he's joined. But for those of you watching, he is a gentleman who was running in Andrew's district, and then he did withdraw, but he actually gave his support to Andrew then. He endorsed him. So do you want to talk about how he came to choose you? How did that transpire?
Sure. I actually don't know. Matt's a great guy. He jumped in the race a couple of months after I did and brought a whole heap of energy and a whole heap of folks from usually underrepresented parts of Denton. Matt's big in the music scene there. And so I was thrilled that he jumped in because the more Democrats that we get in and the more young people, especially, that we get into politics, the better everything will be. I was as shocked and as surprised as anyone when he posted that video, withdrawing from the race and saying and throwing his support behind me. I was incredibly grateful for that. But as to why he chose me over the other person in my race, I couldn't say. I'm just grateful to have his support. I welcome it. It's a voice that our local politics definitely needs, and I wish him all the best. I know that he's dealing with some family issues and hope that he can overcome those so that he can be the voice that I think Denton politics desperately needs.
Absolutely. His video that he made for withdrawing just had me in tears. It was so amazing and it was so just mature and you know, because doing what I do talk to candidates who aren't ready. I can tell, but they don't have the maturity to pull out, and I don't diss that. But I think what he did was so brave and so admirable. And I'm sure it wasn't easy.
You can tell that it wasn't easy for him. And I really have to commend him for that.
Absolutely. I also see that you're friends with Lindsay Fagan.
Yes.
I had her on like a week ago. She's in a different district. So are you guys, isn't that correct?
Yes, I often tell people that I'm the one who wants to go down to Austin. Lindsay's the one who wants to go up to DC.
Right. Yeah. Because I see you guys look like you're doing kind of joint events.
Yes. I'm someone who wants to team up with any Democrat in my local area, because it's not just, it's all well and good me getting elected, but if I'm the only one who gets elected, especially in a red place like Texas, it's not going to move the needle that much. But if we're able to get candidates elected up and down the ballot, from our governor's race all the way down to our justice of the peace races, then we can actually start to achieve something. Lindsay and I met towards the end of 2016, early 2017. I actually was her campaign manager for the first half of 2017. And when it became apparent that there wasn't really anyone running for 64 at that time, that I had heard rumors that there were a couple of candidates that were being talked about, but they declined to run for one reason or another. I decided that with the connections I made working on Lindsay's campaign, it would be something that would be best for me. So after talking it over with my wife and letting her know that you're probably going to lose me for the next year and a half, because I'll be out and about everywhere trying to meet as many people as possible, when I got the okay from her, that's when I jumped in. And because of that pre-existing relationship, and because Lindsay is fantastic, I'm always partnering up with her, and especially when our resources are limited, being Democrats in Texas and not taking PAC money or corporate donors or anything like that, the more that we're able to achieve together, the better it will be.
Absolutely. And I think it says a lot about you both as candidates, that you are, it's not necessarily about competition. You are willing to work with other people even while you're campaigning. I think exactly. That it sets a good precedent, honestly. Yeah. I did see that you were, you did campaign for Bernie yes. back during the primaries. Mm-hmm. Yay.
Yeah, co-founded the Denton. Yeah, co-founded
that's like my unspoken prerequisite, but
yeah. Yeah, I co-founded the Denton for Bernie Sanders Facebook group. I was a moderator and admin of that group. We set up a couple of events in Denton to bring people out to see Bernie and hear his message. I think we arranged one for a let's see, I think it was a public speech that Bernie was giving. So we arranged a venue and brought people out for that, registered voters. And then we also, I think for the first debate as well, organized an event to bring everyone out to see what Bernie had to offer.
Awesome. So what actually got you interested to get into a race, to actually go to that?
Yeah. So this was always going to come for me. The election results of 2016 accelerated my timetable a little bit. I'm always active on Facebook. I was always sharing my opinion and either trying to correct the record or share different perspectives or just bring a different side than was commonly being driven, because I think, and this is why education becomes my biggest and key platform piece, is everything springboards from that. And seeing that what I was doing online wasn't really shifting the needle, wasn't persuading anyone, especially, and that led to 45 selection. That's when I decided that I needed to get out from behind my computer screen and out talking with people so that we can have those conversations to see where they're coming from and see if we can figure out where we might agree and how we can move towards what I would like to see our politics being. So that's why I got involved with Lindsay. She reached out to me and I thought that this would be a good start, and just being more active than just kind of flitting around the edges like I had prior to last year.
Do you think that if Hillary would have won, you'd still be politically active?
Yes, I would say if Hillary had won, I would have been politically active. I wouldn't be able to say I would be as politically active as I became during last year. I certainly would have run for something. Probably not this race, probably not this soon, but it was kind of in my tea leaves, as it were.
Right. I think that's inspired a lot of people to run pretty expeditiously.
Yes. I know that it was a motivating factor for Lindsay as well, and pretty much anyone who's running, at least in Denton County, I think was pushed into this by the election outcome of 2016. I also think that I'm a historian, I have 3 degrees in history, just because history is my passion. And because I kind of have that ability to take sort of a long view, I think that the election of 45 will be a turning point in a positive sense in terms of engaging the far more people into politics and reducing that apathy and making everyone realize that you have to pay attention and you have to be engaged and involved. Otherwise, bad things like 45's election can happen.
Well, and also, the failure of democracy and all the cheating we witnessed on the so-called Democratic side. That being said, since we've had proof of that forever, everything like that, and more has come out. Even people started admitting it, everything like that. Were you always going to run as a Democrat, or did you consider going independent or something like that, just because of what they have done to us?
Sure. I was always going to run as a Democrat, and there's a number of different reasons for that. The first one is the Democratic philosophy and the Democratic platform that ended up being written and passed by a lot of Bernie supporters and a lot of Bernie delegates. Meant that was something that I could get behind. I'm also a realist in the sense that when you have a 2-party system, if you want to be part of the process, especially because the barrier for independent and third-party candidates in at least Texas is so high, if I was going to be effective, that's what I kind of had to choose which side I was going to be on. And I'm also someone who believes in changing from within, and it's all well and good leaving, but when there's no good alternative to achieve the aims that we want, it's better to be involved and be that voice from inside. Otherwise, nothing's going to change, and it's actually just going to get worse.
What do you think that they could possibly do at this point? Because they're not really saying anything they stand for. The Dems have a habit of, like, I'm talking, DNC and what have you. They have a really bad habit of just talking about anti-Trump. Millions of us have left, and, millions of us have Dem exited, but they're not even attempting to get us back. They're not even telling us, you know what, this is what we stand for. We want to get back to this, things like that. It's just like the DCCC came out with their new slogan, which is literally, have you seen the other guys? That's their slogan. How does that entice people to join you, So, you're on the more local level, per se. So it's not as, as drastic where you are. But what do you think they can possibly do to try and win people back, to try and gain their votes?
Yeah, it's about having a positive message, one that contrasts with what we're seeing right now. That's why I'm not really relying on the fact that 45's in office. It's a case of he's a motivating factor. He's probably going to drive more people out, especially during a midterm, than we have likely seen before. And so I'm cognizant of that. But especially on a local level, it's about local issues and what's impacting my constituents on a day-to-day basis. And that's making sure that public education is funded adequately, is available to everyone, that we don't need student loans to get higher education, that we have a medical system that works for everyone, that isn't based on profit, but based on needs and the ability to care for everyone. It's about the infrastructure that we need, not just in terms of the roads we drive on and the we have a local dam that is almost needs to be fixed. Otherwise, we're going to end up with downtown Dallas flooded. But it's also the human infrastructure as well of making sure that they have the healthcare, the education, and the ability to get around and to breathe the air and drink the water that we have without getting sick. Those are the issues that are more pertinent to them than who's in the White House. And that's what I'm running on, is that positive message.
Right, absolutely. I was looking at your platform. I actually work in healthcare, so that's something I see nonstop is I deal with people on Medicare, Medicaid, things like that. So I see how astronomical the prices of medications and procedures and things like that. You put on your website affordable healthcare, which kind of sounds like the Affordable Care Act, which isn't very affordable. So what do you mean when you say that? Like, affordable for who?
For everyday Texans, in my case, and everyday Texans for everyone as well. Based on my experiences in the UK and in Australia, I know that either a single payer healthcare system or a Medicare for all system works. And it works to the point that in a recent study of the 11 most wealthy countries, the UK and Australia were ranked number 1 and number 2 in terms of their healthcare systems. And the US was way down at 11th. And that's what it comes down to. And it's about incremental change. The Affordable Care Act was a start, but it's by no means is it a silver bullet or a universal panacea. And I think if Democrats had been bolder and more decisive, that we could have a single payer or a government option or something that would make healthcare far more affordable than it even is now, let alone what it was pre-2008. In my role as a state legislature, what I can do for Texans is push for the Medicaid expansion so that those under 400% of the poverty line can access healthcare without having to go thousands, if not tens of thousands, into debt. Beyond that, it's about setting up the argument and the system in order to push for that universal healthcare system. And I know it doesn't sound the most revolutionary of concepts, and it's not what we would like to see right now, but it's about getting to where we need to go. And it's all well and good trying to say we need single payer and universal healthcare right now, but it's not going. It's right now. There's too many who don't like it for whatever reason, be that because they're fearful of it, or because they've been brainwashed into hating it, or because they don't think that healthcare is something that the government needs to be involved with. That those are obstacles we need to overcome first before we're able to achieve what we want. Especially as a state legislator, the ability for me to impact something on a national level is limited.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's really important that you can testify to someone who has lived in other countries who can say this does work. So you definitely have that advantage, because you're right. There's a lot of incorrect thought processes out there with, oh, well, Canada has it and you have to wait 2 years on a waiting list for things and just things like that. So it's good to actually have someone who's been to, who's from countries who actually know where it works. So another thing I saw on your posts on your page was talking about DACA and Dreamers. So, and that was also recently. So it seems like you're kind of getting involved with some events for that. Can you kind of explain your stance on that and why you're passionate about it?
Yeah. Obviously, as an immigrant, immigration issues are near and dear to my heart. I became a citizen 2.5 years ago, and my citizenship process was 6 months. I applied in January, and I went through my ceremony in July. And that 6-month process should be the same no matter where you're from, or no matter your background, or no matter your English speaking skills. Even for someone like myself, some of the forms and some of the questions that were asked were confusing even to me, a native English speaker. And so when it's difficult for someone like myself, it's going to be so much exponentially harder for someone who doesn't have English as a native language. And that's something that needs to be corrected. And it's also, the process needs to be the same for everyone, no matter where they're from. When it comes to DACA recipients in particular, and Dreamers, they need to have a pathway to citizenship. And that's just it's really a no-brainer. When they come over here as kids, they're raised as Americans, they believe themselves to be Americans, and quite frankly, they are Americans, then they need to have the ability to participate in our democracy, participate in our society, and not be afraid of getting that knock on the door, because quite frankly, that's no way to live. More broadly than that, I think that we need to have a complete overhaul and reform of the immigration system. The fact that we have so many in the shadows isn't good enough. Plus the fact that a lot of those who are considered undocumented immigrants are people like myself who flew in, or came in through some of the ports and overstayed their visas. That's where the focus on illegal immigration needs to be, not those who are fleeing persecution from Latin America or elsewhere around the world. And immigration, and because of my background, the plight of immigrants and refugees in particular has always been something that has got not just my dander up, but my wife's dander up. When we had the Syrian refugee crisis was at its peak in 2015, she and I got in big Facebook arguments with our friends and relatives all over the countries, and they couldn't understand how long and how expensive and how arduous the process was. And it got kind of testy. So my wife and I decided, for every negative comment that we received, we were going to pay $10 towards the International Rights Commission, I think it was. It was a refugee organization that went into places like Syria and Iran and the Middle East to provide services for those refugees. And we raised something like $160 doing that. And we were very grateful to see that actually sparked some of our other friends who were supportive of our position to do the same thing. And that's the type of representative that I'm going to be. It's the type of person we are and what we want to see it as our politicians exhibit. And that's also why a couple of weeks ago I participated in the North Texas Dream Teams event at my alma mater to provide services for DACA applicants to help them go through and apply for the process. And it again comes back down to education. When you start to realize how much these DACA recipients have provided to society already without anything being given to them, then it's clear that they deserve to stay.
Absolutely. We've all seen the videos of the fathers hugging their children and their wives and being pulled away. I mean, how do anyone who would be against that basically has no empathy and no heart, essentially. So, that's a litmus test for a lot of people. Do you believe in single payer? Do you believe in helping DACA? Things like that. Gus, you make a good point. I was thinking the same thing. A lot of those people are refugees because we are bombing other countries. So we have to take some responsibility for that as well.
And one more point on that as well is that if you're going to claim to be for family values, there's nothing more antithetical to family values than tearing families apart.
Absolutely, 100%. You also had a post recently about the resurgence of white nationalist groups in Texas. Can you explain a little bit of what you're seeing and what's been transpiring?
Yeah. In Denton, on the courthouse square, there's a statue or monument to the Confederate soldiers who fought, and that was put up at the height of the Jim Crow era. It's actually the 100th year this year. Come July, it's going to be 100 years since it's gone up. That has become a rallying cry for white supremacists. We have an organization called Vanguard America that is in our community, and they're posting white nationalist, white supremacy flyers across both our university campuses here in Denton. And it's something that became even more apparent after Charlottesville last year, when Heather Heyer was unfortunately killed. And as a result of that, there's been a growing movement to get that Confederate monument off the Denton Square, because it is such a rallying cry and a rallying point for white supremacists. And I've lent my support and my energy and my platform to those who want to see it gone. And pretty much, I think every candidate in Denton County on the Democratic side has at one point or another advocated for that removal.
That's good. It's not something we're hearing a lot of people talk about anymore. It was kind of Charlottesville, and then it kind of died down, lack of a better term. So it's good to still hear people talking about it, because people are obviously comfortable at this point to preach that hate, which is, definitely, lack of a better term, not a good thing.
And I will say for Denton, there's a local activist who's been protesting for, I think, 19 years. He's been protesting that, and it's been over the course of the last 18 months that it suddenly pricked our local community's consciousness, and a whole lot more people are getting involved. And unfortunately, while we were able to get a committee formed through the County Commissioner's Court to consider what to do with the monument, they ultimately decided to leave it in place and add extra context around it. And I won't hold my breath to see when that's going to happen, but it's just unfortunate that there's been no moral fortitude or moral character from those appointed to the committee or on the county commissioners themselves to deal with this and make it less of a rallying point for everyone, or at least on the white supremacist side.
Wow. Now, is Texas a open primary or closed?
It's an open primary, so okay. So when you go to the polls, early voting starts February 20th, goes through March 2nd. Election day is March 6th. You're able to decide to pick a Democratic ballot or a Republican ballot if you want to participate. And that doesn't lock you in as a Republican or a Democrat. It just means that for this cycle, that's who you identified as.
That helps your campaign so much. I'm in Pennsylvania, and we have closed primaries. So you better know who you're voting for over 30 days in advance, or you're not voting for them. What's that?
Yeah, it's why I'm a huge advocate for same-day voter registration as well as automatic voter registration when you turn 18.
Absolutely. And do you think that all states should be open primary then as well?
Yes, I think the more options you have and the more, the better, the easier it is for you to vote and to choose who you want to vote for, the better our democracy will be. And that's why New York's primary system in particular is so disheartening for me because of how far in advance you have to register in order to participate in the primary. Yes, it's at the point where unless you are plugged into your local politics, you have zero thought about what to do, which is why I don't think primaries ought to be closed. It's why I think, like I said, voter registration needs to be same day as well as automatic.
100%. I think we'd have a different person in the White House if that happened in 2016. We saw over 3 million ballots in California get trashed. We saw over 1 million independents in New York get pushed away because they were, independents. We saw this all over. So, and you have to wonder if it's like that on purpose. Like if it is by design, are they trying to keep progressives out? Because it certainly seems that way.
It just goes back to over the past 10 to 15, maybe even 20 years that there's been increasing voter apathy, and that's why turnout in the US is some of the worst amongst all industrial nations or Western developed nations, because there's that no one really thinks about it until bad stuff happens, and so the political class are able to get away with it. And then when we saw such a resurgence, thanks to Bernie, and then because of Trump's election, that's when we started realizing how the system is crooked and weighted against the everyday person.
Absolutely. It definitely, we got that free education, as I like to say. Wasn't the kind we wanted, but...
But now that we know about it, that's how we can start advocating for changes and fixes to the system. I think New York might be considering changing their primary system. I don't know if that's actually going to happen, though. But certainly, once we're aware, we can start educating. And that's the power of education.
100%.
And that's why it all comes back to education. That's why it's my biggest thing. I've worked in education. I've studied in numerous systems. And without that foundation, you really can't achieve much of anything at all.
Yeah, I agree. And also, I worked for a student loan company for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania for years. And I would have these kids calling, just, bawling their eyes out. I can't even find a job. I have $200,000 in loans. What am I going to do? And, they're trying to better themselves. They're trying to better their lives, but they have this, this thing that's like gripping them that they can't get rid of, which typically they never even pay off. So what, I know you do want free college education, or?
Yes. So there's a number of different options when it comes to tertiary education, college education. The first one is government funded, government backed. That's what the UK used to be. There's also another model that might be a stepping stone, which is in Australia. When I studied in Australia, the way that it works there is it gets paid for you. It gets tied to your equivalent of a social security number. And then once you graduate and once you start working in the workforce, it becomes an extra deduction out of your paycheck. And it scales so that if you don't earn that much initially, then only a small amount gets taken out. If you're fortunate to earn a higher wage, then a higher percentage gets taken out. And that's a system that's worked very well for a long time out there. And it means that those coming out of college aren't weighed down by significant debt. It means that there's no interest accruing, and it's because it's through the government, there's no profiteering mechanism. And that's the big issue that the US has now is, first, you need to have the money before you go, which is the wrong way around. Second is you have conglomerates and monopolies on that. And third, if you end up coming out with 6 figures worth of debt, that's effectively a mortgage. So you're already way behind the 8 ball and you're not able to get out of that. And then we wonder why the housing market isn't doing great. Well, if you have one mortgage, there's no way that you can take another mortgage on top of that. So certainly, at least the first 2 years certainly have to be government paid, and increasing to 4-year education as well. And that's through public schools. If you have the resources and you have the willingness and ability to go private to a Harvard or a Southern Methodist University, then that's completely fine. That's up to you. You just won't get government support for that because it's public education that needs the most resources.
Absolutely. And, speaking of like another mortgage, healthcare is as well. So
Yes.
if you need healthcare and you have a student loan and you have like a mortgage or apartment, you better have a damn good job, pretty much.
And a living wage.
Yeah.
Try if you are earning 7.50, 7.75, $8 an hour, there's no way you can afford any of that. And so that's why I'm an advocate for raising the minimum wage. I was stunned. There, at one of my old jobs, there was a sign in our break room that was talking about the recent increase to 7.25. That was back in 2008. I think it happened right as I arrived here. And this was 2011, 2012. And I saw that and I was like, surely it's not that still. So I looked into it and I was like, nope, it hasn't moved since. And it still hasn't moved. And now we're 2018. I'm glad that they are looking at places like Seattle and San Francisco. And I think even New York is working towards raising the minimum wage to $10, $12, $15 an hour. That's a start. It needs to happen on a federal level, and it needs to be tied to the rate of inflation, or at least the cost of living index, so that it doesn't stay put and we start having less buying power as time moves on.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you familiar with what's called MMM?
Yes. So this is where having the connection with Lindsay helps. And so she came to me and was like, I got roasted for MMT because I kind of got lost on it. So I made sure that with this coming up, that this was likely going to come up and I better study up. So I have studied up on it. I'm also a paid up member of the Democratic Socialists of America as well. And at their last meeting, I was talking about that and this came up again. And so someone who is more familiar with it sent me a lot of resources that I've been trying to read through. And it's something that makes sense to me. And it's something that from an economic point of view makes sense. We just need to have the political leaders with the courage to pull it around, which is so. Yeah. So for those who aren't necessarily familiar with it, which it's basically instead of the process of tabs, i.e. taxes and borrowing leads to spending, you reverse that to effectively stab, which is spending, it then leads to taxes and borrowing, so that we figure out what we need first and then start raising it rather than raise money and then decide what to do with it.
You're I feel bad. I feel like Lindsay led to believe it was me. It wasn't me. It was the comments. I promise.
Yes. Yeah. I just know that it was through Lindsay, so I made sure to. And this is what I'm going to be when I'm your representative. If I'm not familiar with something, if I don't know what I need to know about, I figure it out, go find out, and build up my knowledge of that, so I can actually have an informed and useful conversation with everyone. And I won't go hide either.
What's that?
And I won't go hide either. That's what a lot of our current representatives are doing, is they're running and hiding because they don't want to face their constituents. And that's why we need to, that's why Lindsay and I are having a town hall coming up together. And that's why I think everyone, especially at the state level and at the federal level in our area, are having town halls and going out and holding meet and greets and going out to the community so that we can figure out what exactly their concerns are. If they have questions, we can answer them and actually just be present rather than distant.
Yeah, absolutely. Are people politically active where you are, as far as not just women's marches once a year or what have you? Are they actually, are there events going on frequently?
Yes. Especially in the lead up to this election. So this past cycle, I think, has been an aberration because of 45's election. There seems to be dozen events every week, sometimes half a dozen on the same day. So I've actually had to start paying attention and actually working on my calendar. I have my weekends are packed. I'm jumping from one event to another event to another event, and there's certainly been an uptick in activist activity in my local area, and that's good to see. And it's also different faces, different people in focusing on different areas. So we have Indivisible Denton was the big reaction to 45's election. There we had a women's march that was spontaneous, led to Indivisible Denton. That spawned our Vote Denton group to register voters, and we, as of last count in Denton County, we had something like just shy of 475,000 people registered to vote in Denton, which is an incredible number. It's about 100,000 or so more. No, I may be exaggerating there. There's a significant number more, and now everyone I know is a deputy voter registrar. We have events for the monument in Denton. We have activists working to protect Dreamers through opposing DACA. We have another group talking about and opposing the bathroom bill that tried to go through and we were able to defeat. We then also have another group that meets every Monday to protest our federal representative, Michael Burgess, on Moral Mondays. I've been a part of that for a few weeks, and that's fantastic. It's always good when you annoy and frustrate and get a reaction out of the office staff, like I did the last time I went. It means you're having an effect when they actually start engaging rather than just taking everything that you're saying. So yeah, those are just examples off the top of my head of how much more engaged and active this community has been getting, and it's been so thrilling to see. And going around on all of my block walks myself and with Lindsay and all of our supporters and volunteers, it's amazing. Pretty much the universal response that we're getting is, I didn't realize Democrats were running, and I also didn't realize that politicians actually cared enough to come knock on our door. And that's what's showing me, in addition to the results in Virginia and last night in Michigan and the result in Wisconsin a couple of weeks back and the races in Oklahoma, where Democrats are winning 10, 20, 30-point Trump districts. That shows that we're having an impact and that we can win in the reddest of areas. And I think Kat, one of my supporters who's on, just mentioned environmental groups. Yeah, environmental groups are huge. I can't believe I neglected them. So Denton banned fracking and in 2014, and the representative who was in my seat before the current incumbent voted for the House bill that overturned that and sold out to oil and gas. And so there's now a huge movement to try and protect our hospitals and our schools and our communities from frack sites. They're getting increasingly closer to our communities. Denton has the worst air quality in North Texas, even worse than Houston, which is refinery central. And we're slowly getting somewhere. Just last night, our city council voted 6-1 to have 100% renewables for our energy sources. I think we'll be the second city in Texas to do that. The only unfortunate side is we have a gas plant that got pushed through. It's the biggest purchase in our city's history. It's basically going to be a white elephant. There's more than a whiff of corruption about it, and we're trying to undermine and push it away. But I think the contracts are being locked up too tight. So I may be rambling, so I'm sorry.
Oh, no, that's awesome. I love learning about these things in other states, especially as an organizer as well. Is the gentleman running against you who is also a Democrat, is he as involved with activists as you are?
Yes, I'd actually say he's probably more of an activist than I am. He's a great guy. He's led numerous events against for Dreamers, against the Confederate statue. He's also led one of the big pushes against my alma mater, bringing in Donald Trump Jr. for a speech. He led a protest against that, and he's been a big voice for a lot of these protest groups. He just infects you with his enthusiasm and passion.
Well, Well, the fact that you're speaking respectfully about him is pretty damn classy, I gotta say. Is there something that stands out that differentiates the both of you?
Apart from my accent, you mean?
No, like stance-wise or platform-wise.
Our platforms are pretty similar. One of the big differences between the two of us are the way we approach the policies that we stand for. It's part of the reason why I'm so respectful of Matt is because we are both on the same side ultimately. We're both fighting for the same things. We want the same outcomes, and there's no point denigrating each other because we have a bigger opponent to face in November. And so that's why we both pledged to support the other no matter the outcome in March, because it's going to take all of us, and we can't alienate one person's support group or another, because that's how we end up with a 45 situation. One of the ways that and so it comes down to a matter of approach. My colleague who I'm running against is someone who is very definitive about where he stands and what he hopes to accomplish, and is very loud and proud, and will plant the flag and draw a line in the sand and be very definitive about that. Whereas my approach is much more collaborative, much more questioning and being able to persuade someone to my point of view. And I've seen that work over and over again. I was at an event with with Republican candidates, and we were having a conversation because we'd been at another event earlier that week. And so we were just kind of catching up on that, and we got to marijuana legalization. And he was like, I was with you. You had a great amount to say in that education forum. I just can't go there as far as marijuana legalization goes. And I was like, yeah, that's fine. But would you at least consider descheduling it? Because there's no rhyme or reason outside of wanting to keep this losing effort war on drugs. So why don't we bring it down from Schedule 1 to say a Schedule 2 or a Schedule 3? And he was like, yeah, I can get on board with that. I can see the reasons for that. And it's that sort of approach where you can get someone to say yes to something, if not the entire thing that you want, because you're moving towards where you want to be. Because once you deschedule marijuana, then you're able to make a better case for legalizing it for medicinal purposes and then ultimately recreational purposes. Because that way the tax revenues are going to be huge for it. We see that in California and in Colorado and now in California, amongst other places, that marijuana is not harmful, it's helpful. And it's not just helpful for those who want to have it, but it takes a huge burden off of the criminal justice system, which is racially tinged and impacts people of color far more than whites. And we now have demonstrable evidence of that. I think Vox put out an article recently showing how even in states that have it legalized, people of color are still stopped far more often than whites and are still approached far differently. That's not good enough. That has to change. But the point is, those revenues can open up so many different avenues. It can provide healthcare for all. It can provide public education, well-funded public education. It can fix our roads and our infrastructure that's failing. And it's cutting off our nose to spite our face, where not only do we lock people up for minimal amounts of marijuana, but they become a drain on society because it's the taxpayers who are funding them being behind bars when they could actually be outside in society, actually contributing to better outcomes for everyone.
Well, that's something else I noticed on your page that I'm very passionate about. You actually talked about for-profit prisons, which I don't see candidates talk about nearly enough. And that also, is related to marijuana legalization. If you have that and you have less people in prison and, so that I was really impressed that you mentioned that. Why is that something you're passionate about? Is it kind of because of the marijuana one legalization, or?
It's a couple of things. So one of my taglines that I don't use often enough is there's three things that should never be for profit. That's education, healthcare, and the judicial system. And it's just something that I don't know where it is, but I'm someone who, if they see something that's not right happening, such as people of color being targeted far more than whites, that there's something morally wrong with that, and that needs to be addressed. And when it ties back to usually getting stopped for marijuana possession, that isn't good enough. That needs to change. My wife's two grandfathers recently passed away within the space of 8 months due to cancer. One of them had got a whole lot of his suffering was alleviated because of marijuana, and it actually changed my mother-in-law's and my grandma-in-law's perspective on it. When they saw what an positive effect it had, that's when they started realizing that perhaps we do need to actually allow it to be medicinally legal at a minimum, so that those who are suffering can find relief. And more than that, I have a couple of friends as well who have actually had to move out of state because they're being entrepreneurs. They're trying to do their own business to provide for their families, and they can't do that in Texas because it's illegal. And if you've watched the debates between myself and my other colleague, you'll see my quip when this came up about marijuana legalization, which is Texas should have been the first state, not the 10th state to legalize it, especially because of our climate is perfect for it. We have the space for it. We have the irrigation for it. So it makes great sense, economic sense, let alone the moral sense and everything else, to have it legal here in Texas.
Absolutely. If there's one thing you want to leave with the people who are watching, like a final thought that you want them to take away. And I know they're saying you look like Doctor Who, and I don't even know. I didn't even notice that. So, I mean, I don't really watch it, but
yeah, so we have TARDIS here, and then we have the 50th poster over here with David Tennant, Matt Smith, and John Hurt. So, yeah, I'm big Whovians. My work bag is a TARDIS. So, yeah, Doctor Who is amazing, and that's actually, yeah. So Doctor Who is actually someone who I admire, and especially with the way the BBC have portrayed him. So he's a hero, but he doesn't think he's a hero. And he's a hero because instead of a powerful warship, they give him a telephone box for the police that you use to call for help. They don't give him a weapon, they give him a screwdriver because he wants to fix things. And then instead of an extra arm or a leg or special abilities, they give him an extra heart to show his compassion for those who are suffering. And so he's a great role model that I try and emulate as much as I can. And in terms of final thoughts, you can't quite see this, but I wear a vest because that reminds me that I need to be invested in Texas, in my community, in my constituents, and that's kind of my go-to political outfit, and that's why it's on my sign. It's invested in Texas, and I capitalize the V because it's just a constant reminder every time I go out to an event or I give a speech or I talk to constituents to remind me that it's not about me, it's about them, and I need to be invested in them in order to be successful. Because if they don't believe in me, then how can they trust me to do whatever it is that I claim I'm promising to do? If any of your listeners or watchers want to help me out, they can go to my website, morrisfortexas.com, which is all spelled out. They can go to my Facebook page, which is also Morris for Texas. My Twitter handle is @MorrisForTexas. I'm hugely original when it comes to this. And then they can also contribute to my campaign. $10 gets a yard sign, $35 gets a road sign to get my name out within my community. Democrats have often been very hidden in my community, so I'm trying to change that. That's why Progressive Democrat is in big letters on my signs, to let everyone know that Democrats are out here and we're going to fight back this time. And to donate to my campaign, they can go to tinyurl.com/ send Andrew to Austin. And I send personal thank you cards to everyone who donates to my campaign. It's all handwritten. If anyone has any questions or comments, they can email me at andrew@morrisfortexas.com. That comes to me, not my campaign staff, because if those who take the time to reach out to me deserve a personal response from me rather than a form letter from an overworked staff member who probably actually doesn't even believe in what they're sending back, but it's their job that they're having to do. And so that's just what I'm trying to bring to this, is that personal touch that politics has been missing for a long time now. And thank you so much for the opportunity too. Sorry, I almost forgot that. Thank you so much.
No, I was just going to thank you. I am, very impressed with so much of what you've said and so much of what you're doing. It's pretty amazing. And you're like the 10th person I've had from Texas. I don't know what it is, but you guys are taking over. Progressive candidates are definitely in Texas.
Yes.
So that's good. And Tom Wakely, do you know him?
Yes, I actually got to meet him.
Oh, okay. He's coming back on again because he's doing some tour for marijuana legalization.
Okay.
It's like a musical tour.
Oh, nice.
So he wants to come back on and talk about it. Like a lot of cool people from Texas. That's awesome.
Yeah, Tom Wakely is the Bernie Kraut in the Panama hat.
Yes, exactly. Well, thank you again so much, Andrew. I wish you the best of luck. And also, to remind everyone, March 6th is the date to vote.
Yes, that's the Texas primary date, first in the nation.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Andrew. Seriously, best of luck. You are awesome. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for watching, guys.